Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Security Squawk podcast. I am your co-host, Brian Horning, with Reginald Andre and Randy Bryan. Welcome to the show, guys. Welcome to another week. We're rolling late this week, right? We're going live and recording on Friday. We usually do Tuesdays, but life got busy, business got busy, and we don't get paid for this, so we got to set our priorities right.
Yeah.
So luckily we the three of us work together really well, and we still make time to bring this content to you. So since we do that, the only fee we ask of you, if you can help us grow the show, share the show, rate the show, all these things help these platforms get this content in front of other people. So even if you don't share it on your social media, just drop in a 5-star review on iTunes, helps us out. Google Podcasts, Audible, wherever you listen to us, really helps us out. And then we live stream on YouTube and Facebook. You can always just click the little share button there and let people know why it's a worthwhile podcast for them to listen to. So today's show, we're going to jump into a Fortune 500 service provider who got hit with ransomware and what the repercussions of that were. And it sounds a lot like Kronos, but it's not. And then we got two smaller ransomware events happening, and we want to jump into those. It's more about criminals changing their tactics versus it being a smaller attack. Because look, we're very familiar with ransomware attacks, and then we hear that the criminals are asking for millions of dollars to go away or unlock the files or whatever they're demanding. And we're starting to see that change at a pretty quick pace, and we're going to jump into that and let you guys know what's changing and why, and we'll get into that for the rest of the show. So as we get into it, this first one, I'm going to pull it up on the screen. So, Andre, it's a Fortune 500 company, and seems like they had a little bit of a problem, and now on the backside of it, they're releasing information that basically is saying a lot of social security numbers were released. Now, I just got an alert, and you guys brought this to my attention earlier in the week. I just got an alert that my social security number is all over the dark web. So I don't think it's the first time that's happened. I don't care because I have credit lock on. You're not doing anything. I got to call the company before I apply for credit, right? Because I have it locked. And that's how I roll, because I know that this can happen at any point in time. And luckily for us, we have a good system where we were able to get an alert when that hit. And, I have protections in place, so I won't be affected. And, you should definitely have your credit checked, right, at all times, or at least have like a Credit Karma type service or some service that monitors your social security number on the dark web. But more so, when it does end up on the dark web, what do, right? You got to lock that credit file and make sure nobody else can use it. And that's kind of where we live today. So, Andre, what's going on? Who's the company involved here? Fortune 500 company, 500,000 social security numbers. What's happening here?
Yep. So Morley Companies, they're a business that provides services to dozens of Fortune 500 companies. And they're essentially saying exactly 521,000 of a mixture of their clients, a mixture of former employees, various clients, social security numbers, date of births, clients identifying information, medical diagnostic treatment information, and health insurance information was leaked. And they're getting a lot of slack here because, this happened back in August. And here we are, January, February, where they're just now releasing that information.
They said that it took all of this time for the security company to basically dig around and figure out exactly what happened and what was released.
Yeah, and that's why Andre and I, before you joined the show, Randy, have always said that they say this stuff way too early, where they say no personal information, no data was stolen, nothing was released, and we always say it's too early to say that. because you haven't done enough analysis, and it took that long, as Randy said, for them to figure this out. And for a big company, it's going to take you a long time to figure out what was actually taken, because you really don't know how they got in. So until you know how they got in, you don't know what they took out of the network. So what else from this story, Randy, caught your eye?
Well, the main thing that caught my eye, and Andre already mentioned it, was the 521,000 social security numbers that were leaked. And then the other one we already mentioned, also just the fact that it took 6 months to exactly figure out what happened. But that's just the way that it goes.
Yeah. And we got social security numbers, date of birth, client identification numbers, medical diagnostic and treatment information, and health insurance information. So that's a lot of damaging stuff, right? That not only can you apply for credit, you have a lot of different things going on here. You can make fake IDs with this, fake insurance IDs, and show up to the doctor like you're Randy Bryan and you're not. So there's a lot of different things here. So what if this happens to somebody figures out that their social security number was one of the ones involved in this breach? What can they do? I mentioned, credit monitoring, credit locking. Is there anything else that you guys would recommend?
I mean, I would definitely recommend that you have something like a password keeper that is letting you know of breaches of your information, similar to one of those services that you mentioned. And then I would also say you definitely need to lock your credit, and you don't have to worry about this near as much, because they have your number, and yes, they can try to do things with it, but they're going to be severely limited because your credit will be locked to them.
Yeah, I agree. And then the other thing too is like, this opens the door. These types of attacks that we're talking about, where people are gathering your personal information, they're trying to piece together maybe who you are and how they can exploit that, right? So they might have your social security number, they might have your address, but they're missing some other pieces that help them really steal your identity. So what I've seen, and I don't know if you guys have any other insight on this, but what I've seen is like targeted phishing attacks start happening, right? To see if they can trick you into logging or going to a website and giving them more data that they can use to try to, I don't know, get credit in your name, maybe try to steal your SIM card so they have control of your two-factor if you're using two-factor with text messages. A lot of these SIM swapping schemes involve identity theft, because in order for me to call your carrier, you have to, know certain information, and, you can gather that information on the dark web. And if there's one or two pieces that you don't have, you might be able to phish somebody to get that. So be mindful of phishing emails and what you click on and what you give your information to. And you kind of mentioned it, but password managers, right? Don't use the same password, because they can kind of use all this information to figure out maybe what password you're using, right? Maybe you like to use the initials of family members, or maybe your own initials, or some format of your initial and your birth date. And they mix all this data up and try to figure out passwords and what's known as a brute force attack to guess your password and break in the front door. No different than trying to guess a password on, like a padlock, right? The ones that have the numbers on it. And you're trying to scroll through and guess the different combinations, and then voila, once you hit one, you're in. So Andre, anything you want to add to this before we move into our next topic?
Yeah, and the article talked about why it's so important that you have to have some type of audit control, because of course, we don't know exactly this situation, but essentially this wasn't a ransomware where the data got encrypted. This is where the data got stolen. And for that amount of size of people's information to get stolen, that was a big size amount. So there should be controls as a business owner that monitors, for example, if an employee or if a certain amount of data only goes through certain hours, and all of a sudden now there's a 30% increase, there needs to be some type of alert or some type of alarm ringing saying you need to look into this. And also, this company is doing work for Fortune 500 companies. This again, your supply chain. Who are you allowing access to your systems um, and have these sensitive information? And what measures are you making sure that they're taking to make sure that your information is safe? Because this is a downstream attack. Yes, they attacked this one company, but this is affecting several thousands of organizations because they're using the service.
Yep, good point. Good point. I like it. So move right along. We'll go into our next topic. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here. And these are, in a way, these next two topics that we're going to jump into. And we are going to run a little bit of a shorter show today. And we're going to jump into these next two topics. And they're smaller ransomware attacks, right? So this first one, Randy, you brought it kind of to the table, so I'm going to kind of let you run with it. But it's this sugar ransomware attack, and get it up here on the screen. Cute little sugar cubes here from our friends over at Bleeping Computer. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, basically, we've been talking for months about how the larger corporations are getting more secure. They have more money to put into it. And you're going to need to follow the money to see where the crime is going to go. And as there's less and less money on those larger companies, you're going to see more and more crime go towards the smaller companies. And this particular, and that's usually in the form of ransomware as a service. And this particular ransomware is a form of ransomware as a service. That means that some, 2-bit thugs, if you will, pay a certain monthly amount or a certain upfront fee to get this software from some more professional criminals, if you will, who developed it and spent the time developing it. And this particular ransomware is targeting one user businesses, individual computers, computers at home, rather than large corporate networks. So it's going after the one-offs, if you will, which is the overwhelming majority of all the computers out there.
Yep. So this is kind of how ransomware started, right? They didn't realize what they had, I guess, so to speak. And when we first started seeing ransomware, it was 300, 500, 700, and there is a market here for this, right? And I don't look at this any different than any industry that has pricing on the low end and pricing on the high end, right? And these guys have kind of decided that their business model is going to be, we're not going to go after the large targets. We're going to go after the small guys, and we're just going to torture, mom, dad, and grandmom, and, hit them up for $500, $1,000 every time we encrypt their family pictures, iTunes, music, or, whatever else they have on the computer. And that's really what this is. So Andre, what are you thinking, with this kind of like residential ransomware?
Yeah, exactly what it is. It's like you said, it's the business model of why some people want to go after the big corporations, big risk, because you go after a big corporation, maybe you hit the wrong person, and now the U.S. government is now telling that country's government that, hey, you need to go after this guy. We know who it is. But if you hit grandma or someone's family photos and it's worth $500 or $1,000 to get it back, they're not going to go to the police and report it. So you can have literally millions of these things happening every year, and it goes unreported, and they're making a lot of money.
Yep. So, do you guys think that this is going to be? And I guess let's just go into the next article because it kind of paints that picture. That what we're talking about here, and that's this report that 82% of ransomware attacks target small businesses, and I think why we want to highlight this is because I do talk to a lot of small businesses, and there is starting to get, just based on how it's covered and what's in the news, there's like a lot of people are starting to have a false sense of security that this won't happen to them, because this only happens to big companies that have millions of dollars or have, a massive cyber insurance policy behind them. And that's not the case. And this article from techseat.co really highlights that and points it out. And then, they're talking about a tactical shift right here that has been introduced by many ransomware gangs, which includes a deliberate attempt to extort companies that are large enough to pay big game ransom amounts. But as you said, Andre, they're they're getting a lot of heat when they do this stuff. So they're changing their tactics. They're basically, I know there was I don't know if it was this article or another article where I saw them quoting a Lockbit ransomware representative, and he basically said that we're really not like interested in going after these big companies anymore, because it does put a lot of heat on us, and it's easier just to hit a medium or small size business up for 20 or 30,000 or 100,000 or 200,000 than it is to ask for these millions of dollars. So what are your guys' thoughts on that? I kind of think that that's where we're going to go, at least in the next 6 to 9 months. From what I'm seeing, is that there's going to be this shift in who they target, and it's not going to be, don't get me wrong, if they get the opportunity to hit a big company, they will. But I think we're going to see a large uptick. And I think what they're going to find, the hackers that is, what they're going to find on the flip side of this is that these companies aren't as well protected as these bigger companies, and they're easier to take down, and they're, therefore easier to get paid on. Thoughts?
It's interesting if you look down at the attack vectors, and remember that we're dealing with companies of 1,000 people or less. Currently, it's a back and forth race between RDP compromise, which is remote desktop protocol, and email phishing are kind of going back and forth on the attack vectors. We know in larger companies that the email phishing seems to be I know we read a survey about 2 months ago of a bunch of IT professionals. They were saying that it was email phishing was by far the number one. This one is saying that it's kind of a neck and neck, RDP compromise versus email phishing. And going back to what we said on the last little segment, it's very important to have a password keeper here, so you're not using a really easy to guess password. You ought to have multi-factor on your employees VPing into the office. You definitely don't want to have them RDP over the open internet. But this is still a huge thing for smaller businesses.
Mm-hmm. And the article rightfully points out that, one interesting conclusion is the dramatic and highly publicized law enforcement takedowns. So that's leading to criminal hackers not having the appetite to take out these attacks. But it's also that businesses should be aware that there's a steadily increasing percentage of ransomware attacks that exploit software vulnerabilities, right? So we know about these supply chain types of attacks. As you can see, is indicated, RDP compromise is still up there, coming down. People are starting to get smart about it, right? But now email phishing is kind of taking its place. So this is basically telling you how most people are getting attacked. And you're talking, between these two, that's 60%, right? One's 30, the other one's 30. And then you got software vulnerabilities, which are going up, right? So they're now going, okay, we can target software, and this is just going to keep going up, right? As long as there's 0 days, there's always going to be a need for cybersecurity. So until the Microsofts and all the software vendors of the world and all the hardware vendors of the world put out stuff that doesn't have vulnerabilities, which is pretty much an impossible task at this point, this red line is going to continue to trend up. Hopefully RDP trends down. And email phishing, I don't know what it's doing. It was like up and down and up and down.
Yeah, it's going back and forth.
Looks like it's going to go back up. I mean, I think email phishing will be that up and down, right? Because the tactics change, and the ability to get email through filters, is successful for a little while, then the filters catch up and it's harder. And, that's going to be one that always ebbs and flows, in my opinion. Anything out of this data, guys, before I move down,
Yes.
catches your eye? Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned it already, the software vulnerabilities. Basically, we now live in an age, if you have software you're not using on your system, just take it off.
Yep.
You need to patch everything that you have. If you have software that, they put it out in 2020, 11, and they've not updated it since, and you have another option, you probably ought to look at another option if possible. You're right. These are on the rise. We've seen some of the bigger attack vectors recently were related to software, like Log4j. And Log4j, there's so much crap software sitting out there that is just on machines no one's using that, has this vulnerability in it. So yeah, that one really jumped out at me. The rising software vulnerability attack vector.
The other stat here that I want to point out is obviously it said for Q3, and this is of 2021, about 13% of the attacks were aimed at consumer services company, while professional services accounted for 20%, almost 21%. And then you have around 10% that was the public sector. So just looking at those numbers and being a student and somebody who studies these attacks and what they're doing as cyber criminals, I'm very aware of what's going on with the public sector, but we don't hear a lot of professional services attacks happening, right? And these are the ones that are kind of swept under the rug, I think, a lot. That you don't hear about them. They're happening, but they're just not publicized, and they're not that big, and they're not attacking companies that are critical infrastructure. They're probably part of a supply chain in some way, shape, or form. But these are the ones you're not hearing about, and it's right here, right? So if 80% of the 80 plus percent of small businesses are being attacked, and of that 80%, you have 20% here that kind of are the victims that we don't really hear about. I just thought that was an interesting stat right here in this little paragraph that was kind of tucked away in there, basically. But that's the largest sector of out of the report is professional services. So this is happening to companies, and we run into companies all the time. We're like, well, I don't have any data. They would never come after me, and that's just not the case. So, anything else in this article you guys want to jump into?
No, only thing I was going to say is, and that's that 20% with the professional services, that's the most dangerous, because that, like you said, the same people that are saying they're not going to come after me, they're the ones getting come after, but then it's not being reported, it's not going in the news. So it's like a cycle of them, the owner, the small business owner for that professional service, just think that it's not happening to me, and it's just going to continue going like that.
Yep. So let's wrap up our show here. We got a few minutes left. We got a question here from a fan. What do you guys think this is the best way to monitor credit, and what are the red flags to look out for? Anybody want to take this one? I just know what to do based on my own personal kind of way of doing things. I'm not a credit monitoring expert by any means, but what do you guys think you should be doing here?
Yeah, like for me, I just like kind of what you mentioned earlier, Brian, just freeze the account. And, anytime the social security number is going to be used somewhere, there's basically a lock, and then there's like a special password or phone call that needs to be made to a 1-800 number. And then from there, it's unlocked, the transaction happens, and then locks back. And that's like what, $100, $120 a year.
Yeah. To add on to that, you probably will be a little overwhelmed at first if you sign up for credit monitoring, because it's going to give all of your history of it. But I would say go lock your credit accounts. What is that? TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Go lock those right away. sign up for the credit monitoring. Once you get over the shock of everything that's already been leaked, most likely, you have your credit locked, and then you've got the monitoring for new stuff and new attempts. I'd want to know when like people were trying to open credit in my name and when things were happening. So I'd kind of have a feel for what's going on, but locking your credit is probably the best thing you can do. The biggest thing you can do.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. I use LifeLock. They're not a sponsor. They should be. But yeah, I use LifeLock. That's what I like to use. I mean, I really don't know of any other product besides LifeLock. I think I've been using that for about 20 years. So I would recommend LifeLock, and red flags to look out for, quite frankly. You got to be monitoring that credit. I think you can do that for free with like Credit Karma. If you start seeing accounts, things being, what do they call that? An inquiry or whatever. If there's inquiries on it usually starts with that. Your credit's got to be pulled, your credit's got to be checked. But it doesn't have to, because I know back in the day, you used to be able to like walk into Macy's and get a card without them checking your credit, So, sometimes people can open credits just with your name and address. And it won't show up on your credit report for like smaller credit types of accounts. So, the best thing you can do is lock your credit, make sure it's locked, make sure somebody can't apply for credit in your name. And there, it's not, I guess the other thing too is when you become a victim, it's you might get a lot of anxiety and things like that around, and this is no different with a cyber attack either. Just know that time will make things pass. Time will make things get better. As long as you have the protections in place, you're going to be okay. And it's going to be annoying because you might get alerts and you might get, all kinds of different things and different notifications that somebody's, but as long as you have that lock in place, nothing bad is really happening. You're just being, you're just getting a lot of notifications about different things that might be happening with your name or your social security number. So, all right, guys.
All right.
I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know we got a busy day, so we're going to wrap it up. Any last words before we wrap it up?
No, just you guys stay tuned. We're going to be having a cybersecurity insurance policy specialist coming up in one of these episodes, so stay tuned for that.
Yep, that, and we got some cool things coming down the road. Don't want to announce them, but we got some things happening on this show that we're excited about, and we look forward to bringing y'all. So, Steven says, thanks for the advice. You got it, Steven. Thanks for being a loyal fan to the show and somebody who contributes and asks questions all the time. And y'all should be more like Steven. Share our show. Get more involved. We'd love to help you out. And we'll see.
Private chat.
Y'all in the private comments trying to make me laugh. All right. So we'll see you in the next podcast, guys. Take care.
All right.